the purpose or the anchor behind a lot of this conversation is going to be around the studio space, but it really is a discussion more about the businesses that are powering studios and what's happening in their world, how that ultimately is changing the way that we think about real estate, studio spaces, the way that we utilize studio spaces. So I think today's objective is to just find this unique composition between the highly talented, highly experienced guys here on stage with me and figure out like where's the world today? Where's the world going in the future? Where have we been? And how's this all going to impact what our day-to-day looks like when we drive up and down our streets around Los Angeles? Let's just kind of start with the state of the market on, what the world for studios is like in entertainment industry.
So 2022 was kind of the high watermark for production in LA. Probably over 130 productions at that moment in time. And what that led to was a glut of studio projects. So we've owned and operated mostly historic studios since 2008, right? We owned Sunset Gower Studios, which was historically Columbia Pictures. We owned Sunset Bronson Studios, which was historically Warner Brothers. And we operated those studios as most studios did for the first 10 years of their life, which was essentially one show in, one show out, one-on-one deals. You're doing a deal a year, just really essentially churning space. Then Netflix jumped onto the scene, and Netflix created a bit of an arms race as it relates to studio space. They took the approach of trying to gobble up as many sound stages as possible, which when you have a user like that who has the capacity that they have, it drives the market pretty quickly. And then we saw studios trading at, sub 3, a sub 3 at cap rate for our project out in Studio City. Michael Hackman bought it.
Radford, CBS Radford.
CBS Radford. I mean, he paid, $1.7 billion for that project, and no one was even close to that number. So when people saw those numbers, we then saw 134 stages sort of jump on the board for entitlement, and then we had the strike. Post-strike, we've seen production down anywhere between 30 and 50%, depending on how you look at it, and more than ever, producers, streamers, they have options. They don't have to be in Los Angeles. We're competing with Atlanta. We're competing with New Mexico, New Jersey, soon to be Nevada, Vancouver, London, New York, all of which have a growing market, all of which have a growing workforce. And LA sort of has lost its edge. And the biggest driver is when we look at costs kind of across the markets, LA is maybe 5 or 6% higher than everywhere else, but we don't have a tax credit, which will drive that number a much further gap. We have a tax credit, I should say, but it's a very small one in comparison to anybody else. So where do we sit today? We're at like 80 shows maybe a year versus 130. Everybody built a business around 130 shows being in LA. And so rates are getting pushed down. We're all fighting again for that 1-year deal when we were getting long-term leases from streamers like Netflix. And we have people like Netflix who are opening studios in New Jersey and New Mexico and aren't going to produce here as much anymore. And so it's going to be a lot of hard times until the market sort of regulates itself a bit. Similar to office space, it's just all hitting at once. So as the workers, SAG and WJ got a lot of wins on the labor side, and they got their increases as it relates to pay and health benefits, which I think we'd all be supportive of. The reality of what happened was all the production houses did was keep their budgets the same. That's great. We'll pay you more, but we're still only spending $500 million, which just means less production. And so now everybody's accommodating to that new world. And so I think we hope over the next 3 to 5 years, you start to see that uptick again and they start to ramp back up. But as of right now, we think we're probably at a place where 80 to 100 productions a year is what we should expect in LA, which when we have a couple hundred stages is going to definitely change that footprint over the next probably 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it might end up being the new normal, right? Like we always think about how, technology and innovation has really set out to disrupt industries, to make them more efficient, to find ways to do things better, faster, smarter. And we're kind of living in this perfect storm where we're just coming off of a strike. The streaming wars have not panned out for all of the streaming companies to really get that return on the investment. Traditional production is slow. LA does still have the infrastructure to be able to support from a lighting, grip, and all the ancillary services that support the business, but we could be in a situation where we're moving from CDs to an MP3 player really, really quickly if you layer on things like AI and some of the other things that we were just talking about, deep tech and different ways of doing business quicker and faster and cheaper. So how do you guys feel like you're responding as a business from Hudson's perspective? You know, there are other bullish landlords who want to develop more studios that feel like maybe enhancing the clear height of a studio or the technology capacity could make it better, or creating some new version of a single studio campus is more attractive to a Netflix of the world. But from where you guys see it, you're clearly aware of the changes going on in the industry and how quickly things could be shifting. How do you feel about, like, is this a new normal? Do you think that there's another wave of entertainment that could flow through LA and continue to power studio spaces? Like, how do you feel about the next 5 years? Personally, not on behalf of your company.
Yeah. Personally, I feel like, look, the waters are going to be rough for the next couple of years. They will start to stabilize. I think, as a company, we're well positioned because we own older product. It's well situated, right? We're in Hollywood. Studios are still similar to commercial real estate. If you are in an A+ location with A+ product, you will still lease. And so as long as you have a stage that is competitive for live, I mean, look, as you'll see in this stage here, it's very different than a soundstage we may own, right? A soundstage we may own is 20,000 square feet, 45-foot clear for a certain type of production. Smaller stages will have a certain type of production. You're seeing, whether it's podcasts, whether you're seeing a lot of short form promo stuff shot here. You're seeing, in our stages, we're able to do a lot of event creation because we have big open space. So it's evolving a bit. But I think for when we're looking at our existing product versus new product, we feel pretty comfortable that we're going to continue to be competitive because we're seeing producers who are cost conscious all of a sudden again. I think when the streaming world started in, 2015, 16, 17, 18, as it was leading up, they were not cost conscious. They were spending whatever they could. I think similar to tech office users, they were learning and growing up and maturing as real estate users. And so that's what's happened. Netflix has matured into a traditional studio. So has Amazon Prime. So has Apple. And they're just now normalizing how they're going to utilize stage space. And I think there's a bit of that because that becomes more predictable for us as owners so that we can figure out how to better plan. And so I do think while the next 2 years are rocky, the stability will come. And then if you're a savvy real estate owner, you'll figure out how to ride that wave, which I think we will.
Thank you. TK, I'm coming to you next. There's a world of LA of content creators that has been around for a very, very long time in all different shapes, forms, and sizes. Some of it is short form content, some of it is long form content, and everywhere in between, different types of production. It seems as though our content creators have kind of gravitated toward certain parts of the city for whatever reason. When we look at a drive time study for an entertainment business, most of the folks live on the east or on the south. And we're starting to see that, a lot of the content creators are living in these areas, but there's no studios that are immediately around it. What advice would you give to a small business that maybe has a following or a little bit of a culture that they've created around new content and different forms of that? But if they wanted to stand up their own studio, in their immediate community where other content creators might be, like how would they interact with you guys on the lending side, just banking in general, to help them to stand up a business like that and be closer to where they're producing the content?
Yeah, I think to start, I would say before you even go to a bank, I would figure out what your goals are, what your short-term intermediate goals are in terms of where you want to reach your audience and how you want to scale the narrative that you have. A lot of times when you're a content creator, you're either doing short form, you're doing a lot of like comedic narratives, or you're doing something that's documentary based. And this is just kind of like on a smaller budgetary scale. Once you have a plan, I'd say, and you kind of figure out, okay, like this is who I'm trying to reach and this is where I'm trying to expand my reach, I would figure out what institutions are in that market that are already doing that, already have that type of audience exposure, already are reaching or telling similar narratives that you can scale through. I mean, there are a number of nonprofits and art conservatives. I know that Art Plus Practice is going through a little bit of a troubling time right now, but I would highlight them in South LA. Also, the Chaos Network in Leimert Park. These are regions where, or nonprofit organizations where not only are you going to be able to get counseling and workforce development and really just kind of understand how to develop your practice, but you're going to be able to network across. I don't mean to quote Issa Rae, but that's probably the best thing that you can do, is build a base of people that are like-minded, have similar type of energies and excitement about the space, and work with them. You know, you might share interests, you might have different interests, but it's easier to scale your work in that capacity. I think secondarily to that, trying to find grants. A lot of times, you know, you'll raise capital and you kind of don't know what type of capital you're raising, what, strings are attached to it. So if you're, a lot of like the sexy ways to raise capital are venture related. I mean, we're at LA TechWeek, so, you're raising capital from a venture capitalist, or you're doing an equity-like deal, you're doing income share agreements. That's kind of selling, or has the potential to sell, part of your business away at a very early stage. I think differently from that, approaching this as like, what sort of grants can I apply to? How can I raise capital from friends and family? How can I be supported to do a workforce readiness or a technical assistance program that could then scale to me being able to touch multiple industries? Because then the capital pool gets wider, and then you could ask for bigger sums of money. So I wouldn't swing for the fences to start. I think that it's a great idea to, build towards a studio or having, a smaller studio in mind as you're building out your practice. But, be more focused on building a stronger base where you're located, and having people know you for the market that you're in and the narrative that you're trying to distribute and differentiate.
That's great. Another component of what you just were describing is this idea of like the upfront capital costs that it takes to stand up a studio. Chris can probably speak to this. I don't know, maybe I could be dangerous, but he probably knows this very well. But soundproofed rooms, depending on the level of soundproofing, 45-foot clear is very expensive to do in this environment. Fire life safety is different. There's versions of assembly ratings that have all kind of technical requirements around it. And standing up a studio is like not only cost prohibitive, but not cost prohibitive for everyone, but it's very expensive. And there are a lot of technical things like power and HVAC and all of those things that are also layered into it. I think one of the most interesting things about where we are today is that we have a business owner who came from Georgia by way of Detroit, and you guys met back then. I heard that part of the story. And you landed here, and a lot of this infrastructure probably was already in place. So the cost of upfront capital to be able to fully design the studio might have gotten minimized versus going out and building it from scratch, which is something that a lot of our clients are looking for these days. I mean, I guess I can't share any of the names of the clients that I personally represent, but I'm actively out looking with, a broadcast radio station who wants to be in a facility that's at least 75% done, just because they understand that it's $300 a square foot just to build out each one of these individual soundproof rooms, if not more. So maybe I can just talk about second generation utilization of space and being thoughtful about it, because I don't know, maybe this might be more personal opinion, but I think the world has enough clothes I think the world has enough cars, and we have a lot of infrastructure around the city that's probably sitting dusty that could be reused for other purposes. So let's just talk about second generation uses and some of the future businesses. Mike, I'm going to pass this to you, that are emerging that might have other uses outside of pure entertainment for studio spaces, sound stages, soundproof rooms, editing rooms, those types of things.
Yeah. So, we see the emergence of, obviously, we have streaming. You probably remember during the pandemic, we had Twitch, which was very popular. Initially, it emerged as a streaming platform for gamers, and then all of a sudden, other people who were doing arts and creative work started using it as well. What's happening is that we've democratized access to the tools for creating content, but all of these content creators do not remain small at-home content creators. Many of them need to graduate, they need to scale up. They are learning the skills of professional media production as they grow their careers. And that's where locations like this or the venues become valuable, because the larger spaces, although they are not necessarily going to be a one-to-one match for those smaller creators, they create an opportunity to be able to have a creative community or a creative hub, essentially similar to a co-working model where you can have multiple creators have a nucleus or an orbit around a studio facility that was previously used by a larger company, but then be able to scale up and integrate themselves into new opportunities that they wouldn't have ordinarily had access to.
That's right. So, the future is something that I think we're all paying a whole lot of attention to. And maybe another thought on that to ask you about, that maybe you know more about than I do, is like, what about the world of like augmented reality? Like, is that like the next big thing that they would use a soundstage like this for? Or is most of this still powered by like short form independent content creators? Do you see a world where, like, I don't know, maybe this studio or a studio like this could get turned into motion capture studios for a gaming industry or augmented reality or something, more future? I mean, you guys had a robotics event here that you were connected to. These spaces have multiple uses. What do you think about the world of like augmented reality? I know it's a big thing that people have been talking about.
So I think when you look at three categories: augmented reality, which is typically where you have a wearable glasses of some sort, and it's inserting content into your optical field, into your field of view. You hear about virtual reality, which is where you're actually looking at a completely simulated environment quite often. And then you have extended reality. And John, I would have to actually ask you what that is, because I think that definition is still emerging. But I know that on the AR and VR side, the specific applications for those, which are most common right now, would be typically in training and education and medical applications. When you have a facility like this gives the ability to do a couple of things which are not allied directly to that necessarily, but more on the content production side, allows you to simulate an environment within the studio using things like the large LED video walls, where you can simulate an entire backdrop environment. So we could change this backdrop to be a mountain in Papua New Guinea, for instance. You can do that using straight video played back, but then you also find that in advanced studios like this, they're using 3D engines like Unreal Engine, and they're actually modeling the entire scene and environment. And it's in the background, but as the camera moves, you're able to actually change the background in conjunction with that as well. That synchronization between multiple media sources, multiple content sources is really powerful. And that fits into one niche in terms of filling a content pipeline. So, I mean, that's a quick snapshot there. I think that definitely on the AR, VR side, the biggest uses for that are training. You can certainly use a facility like this to do motion capture because you have the space to be able to do that. And you have the environment where you can do all of the the old school was the grid tracking. And now we actually are so advanced now with AI that you really can just use the raw video footage as long as it's on a clean background and actually use that as an input. So there's more evolving now with AI. Adobe just showcased recently real-time masking off of video footage where you don't need any kind of additional aids. You can just point it to something and it'll actually let you lift Chris out of the background from the video for this, even if he's moving. And change the background or modify his movements, for instance. So there's some very wild things. The most extreme generative AI, I know I'm diverging, the most extreme and innovative AI that we're seeing now is the generative AI where you're just creating things, but the more tactical day-to-day uses that are valuable are the ones where you're correcting errors and defects and problems in things which you already either have or things you created which are not optimal. So that's enough with the soapbox for that.
I'd actually love to ask a follow-up question both to you and, to the rest of the panel is on the audience. So I feel like from my vantage point, a lot of this is audience dynamics. So like when you're thinking about scaling, when you're thinking about getting comfortable lending to a small business, we think about, okay, like where's the recurring revenue going to come from? Where are the alternative sources of revenue or income that are going to be generated from this individual or this business? When you think about, you mentioned Unreal Engine and how that's being democratized. I mean, I think that that's a very accessible, platform for making this new age content. How do you feel like the audience is going to evolve? Do you think that there are going to be more content creators or less? Do you think that there's going to be a greater audience or less? Do you feel like it's going to be more of a niche audience? Like, what is that world kind of, building off of your question, 3 to 5 years from now, like, where do you see the audience changing or evolving?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
So I'll go back to an art book that I have from Tashin, which covered folk artists in Africa. And they really opened with this preface talking about in African culture, everyone is seen as an artist. Everyone is seen as being creative. They were going around showcasing people who had built homes and they were covered in shells or whatever. And they were talking about how it was normalized. And I think the real issue is that in the West and in the Western world, that the access to creativity has been treated as something that's on high and supreme and exalted, and you don't have access to it. We now all have more access to that than we've ever had before. And the reality is we're just acknowledging the fact that everyone can create content. We all have access to social media. You can write a tweet. Well, you roll that back 60 years and you would have been hiring a writer to write something to publish in a newspaper. We hear arguments about free speech and content. And the real issue is that your speech is free to the extent you can afford to pay for the consequences of it. But the real issues today it's not access to published content, it is distribution. And there's a difference between speaking freely and distributing it. So there's a lot of stuff tied up in this, but I think that the big picture is that there's going to be more access to creativity. There's going to be more control to be able to learn and master all of the skills around all of the media, video, audio, composition, all of it. And if you don't have foundations in some cultural understanding and understanding of the evolution of art and communication, you're going to be less than able to be able to handle those tools. But I think that across the board, you see that with the democratization, there has been overall a skilling up across the board. You meet teenagers who will sit there and watch TikTok back to back, and they don't have college degrees, but they can produce a video that either goes viral or suits their audience and hits all the marks. So it's a mistake to assume that an individual in a room studying a subject long enough won't come to some of the same conclusions that you're going to get out of sitting in a psychology class. You may not have the same terminology, but you can still develop the same innate understanding of the principles you use to actually create the content.
So we got to dig into that a little bit because this conversation is definitely partially about the ability to distribute the art, right? And if everyone can do it in this room, that's one thing. But then the other side of it is the competition for eyeballs. And I feel like maybe just sitting in my seat and my limited research on this, but there's only so many eyeballs, so many hours in a day, and so many consumers that are out there that could capture that content, digest it, and help whoever the producer is to monetize on that asset or whatever the art is. How do you guys feel about the world moving so far in that direction that it's one thing for free speech, free creativity. Everyone amplifies. We're all better as artists. We all communicate these messages. We have our own platforms. But what happens when we get so saturated? Because this is the same fundamental issue that we're having in the traditional entertainment industry, which is, okay, traditional content, TV shows, people want to see it on demand. We go on demand, and there's only so many hours, and there's so much content that's coming at us from so many different directions. Do you think it creates more noise with us as a society getting this much access to producing and distributing content? Or do you think that it's a healthy thing for all of us to be amplifying our voices? Like, and is there a point somewhere in between that we should be finding as the sweet spot to balance those two? Does that make sense? And that's a question for everyone here too. I know you have an opinion on it, and I appreciate it because you're looking at it from the right perspective. But there are so many different layers to this to keep this business idea flowing. And I think that we're at this saturation point where the concern is there's so much quality content that it feels like there's noise. So any thoughts on that from you guys?
So selfishly, I think, yes, there is a little bit too much noise, but I don't think that anybody should be silenced. I think that everybody has a voice and everyone's voice should be heard. That being said, I think that my hope is that we can be a bit more intentional with the content that we put out, because we don't necessarily need to put out the content. And we also don't need to receive the content like at the level that we're receiving it today. You get it on your phone, you get it on TV, even at your computer when you're working at your desk. It's just a lot of content. I think that if we can be a bit more intentional about how we define safety, just blatantly and blankly, that could be a really powerful way to use the content and make it more utilitarian, if you will. Because a lot of content that's out there, the content that's most prominent, is not safe. I mean, it's culturally degradatory in a lot of ways, and it makes people hate people. And I don't know, that's just my personal view. That's not the bank's view. Let's just be clear. Let's just be clear. I'm not saying it's not the safe zone, but it's
safe space.
Yeah. But yeah, like I just feel like that could be a really powerful way to push more content that could be benevolent. I think a lot of it is malicious intentionally, because the malicious content is what gets the eyeballs.
Whether it's platform distributing it, individual creating it, company, entertainment, titan media company creating it, there's only so many eyeballs, and it's right now a free market where you can look anywhere you want to, and it's basically created a situation where the amount of time that people are spending on TikTok is pulling away most of the time that we would have traditionally spent watching traditional TV or streaming. So it just feels like there's a world where the business is just going to cannibalize each other by almost kind of like fastest to scale type of a situation that we dealt with technology a couple of years back, where everybody was just, cutting all costs to just acquire new users and scale their business, so much so that it just cannibalized the whole industry, and there's usually only one or two winners in each one of those situations. So from a personal perspective, I totally promote the idea that everybody's voice should be super amplified. But I just think that the pain that we're feeling in the industry is not only about like the strikes and all the things that are going on from a cost perspective and tax credits and things like that. It's really like there are only so many eyeballs that can look at so many different things. And our entertainment industry is probably getting crippled 25 to 50% just by TikTok, just by a platform where people are spending their eyeballs and their time on that. So I don't know if that ties it in a little bit more, but that was the thought, is like, how do we deal with the fact that there's only so many consumers, and there's so much content, and, all of this content gets produced at this cost number and it doesn't work. And then all of a sudden we have less production. Then all of a sudden we have empty sound stages, and we kind of find ourselves in situations like this, right? It's a big ripple effect.
So I'm going to do a hot take because I actually don't have an opinion on this, but I'll form one. But I think, look, I look at the content that exists today and its various forms and the ways to access it, almost like professional sports, right? There are plenty of amateur basketball leagues. There's, all of these evolving ways to access athletics in some capacity, and that's how I look at content. Netflix, Apple, Amazon, your traditional producers, ABC, whatever it may be, that's the big leagues. All they're going to do as time continues, because they're always going to have the capital, as time continues to spin, what I do think the YouTubes or the TikToks or you name it give you is just more data points on how to leverage the stars that are already floating to the top. Because all they're eventually going to start catering to is age demographics. And those age demographics are going to have every data point you can imagine because they've lived online from the time they were 8 until they're now my age at 40, and you've been tracking what they're looking at and how they look at it and what content creators they've been following and their evolution. And then you eventually, Issa Rae's probably a great example. She started on YouTube, and then, Warner saw the value and brought her into the tent and let her produce at scale for a more mature audience that had matured with her. And so that is where I think you will see all of this go. I just don't think the mature agencies and producers have figured it out yet because they're still trying to play catch up for the war they were just in. But I think, again, as things start to normalize, they will view it as, how do I watch these athletes, these content producers mature into professionals that I can then take and monetize in the scale that we're used to for production. And so that's how I think that this industry will start to stabilize. But it'll be through tech and data that feeds into large producers being able to make more educated bets where to spend $100 million.
Yeah, we extract so much information from just the social aspect. You're right. It's we'll probably get better and better. But I don't know, maybe you might have an opinion on this too, but it probably takes away from the art, right? It's probably a bad thing.
So, I thought you mentioned cost of production of content. I would argue that if you look at 1912 producing a film, and compare it to what it costs to produce something now, that the cost now is actually really, really low. I mean, we all got cameras in our pockets, and these cameras have what? You probably got 10,000 songs, 20,000 songs on it. Would you have that many CDs or albums in your house? Most people wouldn't have all of that. What's happening is that individually, we all have access to or have more content. We're not watching it all the time. And I think that in that context, that the cost of the content itself and even producing it on average has collapsed. And then there's the issue of who are the rights holders, because at a certain level, you had sampling evolving in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and everyone was freaked out. Oh, you can sample music now. They've got these samplers. It's not real music. They're not real instruments. But you had a culture emerge from that. You had hip hop and all these things emerging from that of people sampling things, and they're reconstituting that content. In a lot of ways, as the content volume grows, it becomes a whole new avenue of people being able to mash it up and remix it. And I think that's another lane, which is the mashup remixes of just because people are swimming in content, they're born in it, they're breathing it in and out every day. And there's really no time in history when you've actually had that kind of access. So I think that over time, the concern I have right now with AI that I would think of would be that with AI, you've essentially got this kind of Matrix-esque dopamine machine, because people are punching in a query and they can get back an image which is satisfying. Essentially, if you plug an electrode in, you can just mine the energy off of people entering queries and getting back images that look good. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Because you're polluting people's minds, you're wasting people's times, you're diverting energy for more productive tasks. Some people will find a way to create a pathway from that, but you can imagine, an unscrupulous corporation will go, hey, and there might be one or two out there that we even, see right now might go, hey, we will give you this tool. We will consume all this content in order to be able to programmatically create things which are satisfying to you. And then we will create a channel that's just satisfying content to people, and we will niche down to different niches and just pump that stuff out, irrespective of creators and any original source content. And in that case, I mean, you're looking like you're in the Matrix and you're a battery, because you're paying a fee or you're being monetized for the good of some corporation, which at that point isn't even beholden to other creators at that point.
Yeah, the creator gets boxed out in that situation, which sucks. The other thing is like, what if the AI only just wanted to like trigger emotion out of you, and that was like what it reverse engineered? Like that takes away the art out of all of it. Yeah, okay. I guess I don't do the TikTok things. I don't know, but they make it seem like it gets smarter at like maybe reading your eyes of how you look at the screen. Right. It's definitely listening to you, if you guys didn't know that. Anyway, so we're living in this big world full of change, right? Like who knows what is going to take and what's not going to take. I think the AI conversation is something that we have to unpack a little bit, because I'm trying to start a campaign called Natural Intelligence. It's like wherever that's going, I'm going to
talk about it. You can start right now.
Right. Yeah. Natural intelligence. I like the ring of it because it's the opposite. Right. I feel like was it machine learning, generative AI, and what's the other one? Language models. Large language models. Those things are, they're like, I don't know, like just crazy technology tools that could shape and create responses out of people at masses. But I feel like people still have a appetite for things that are natural, art and the whole thing. But in the business perspective, my kids go to school in Studio City at Carpenter, where 60% of the people that are parents there are writers. And when they went on strike, I was like, holy crap, if you guys go on strike right now, they're just going to take all your jobs with AI. And I feel like there's a world where if we don't like pay attention, art is going to just get disrupted by AI in like some crazy way. And I'm always curious how the impact of business is going to play out, right? It's easily more efficient to say like, oh, if we have AI do the thing that a writer could do, we save a bunch of money. Or if we have editing capabilities by way of AI, we're going to save time, money on production, the whole thing. So when I was making the comment about the CDs, yeah, like I can't carry 1,000 CDs in my pocket, but if there is a world where AI is as good as people say it is, we could already be in the CD phase and just waiting to transition over to a world where things become efficient, especially with like cost of everything and business pressures and interest rates and all the things that make it harder to be a good person to another person and not just a good leader of a business. So do you guys have any like futurist type thoughts about AI and how it'll impact not just studio spaces, but just people's jobs?
Too many thoughts. I'll just lean into the hope again, if you don't mind, of like really just being a good neighbor and knowing your neighborhood. I think that's really going to be even more important in the future because things are changing rapidly. In 2020, we had COVID, micro financial crisis, and rates went through the basement. And there was a massive buying opportunity for a lot of people. And at that point in time, usually in history, if you actually go back to 1992, the LA riots, there was also a massive buying opportunity that happened in Leimert Park and South LA. And if you see kind of the trend that's happening when these strikes or shocks in the economy happen, it leads to massive demographic shift, industry shift, demographic changes, and the neighborhood that you once knew is no longer there. I think that it's going to be really important to identify with space and know, like, who you are, where you're from, who your neighbor is, what the businesses you like are, how you like define your day to day, which is a great way to start this conversation, because that's all going to be super served to you. I think Troy Carter talked about this a while ago, where he said that we're like moving to a world. I think he said this back in 2008, moving to a world where like everyone is getting super served. And if you don't know what you like and why you like it, or what you dislike and why you dislike it, you're just like clicking, moving. I think you talked about the eyes, and you're kind of voting with your eyes. If you have an unconscious way of identifying the things that you're paying attention to, that's a world where you could just be in a spiral. You could literally be in the matrix. So all that to say, I think it's really important to know what you like and why, and what you do, because that's changing, at a rate that none of us are really able to predict.
I mean, I'll make it maybe relevant to the real estate space. I mean, one, I don't think we know what AI will bring, right? We can talk about how AI fits in today's world, but when it is truly at scale for the rest of the population, the world will be very different. And so what opportunities come from that, to be seen. I also think that when you're talking about the real estate space, like for folks like us who look like us to be competitive in a commercial way, in a different way, like AI is a tool that gives you access that I wouldn't have to compete with. Like if I were on my own and trying to compete with a Hudson, I'm never going to have the horsepower alone. But if I have 2 or 3 guys with me and we have AI, we can maybe keep up. And so I think we're in an evolving time, right? Baby boomers are moving out. Millennials are going to be the largest population, if not already the largest population, sort of in the workforce. And that population is more diverse than ever. And for us, we've already had to learn how to be nimble and adapt to the worlds we're not used to. And so as these tools start to roll out, I just think it'll put us in a place to be more competitive, to take advantage, because the baby boomers who are still transitioning or in management level roles are not going to be able to turn it on as quickly as we may be able to. And so in the same way, in boom bust times, there's opportunity. We're looking at that next realm of opportunity, and it's just how we apply it to whatever sector we're in, whether it's in real estate or otherwise.
I have to throw this as just a counterpoint for everybody, because I love all of us and I care deeply about people, but I'm actually seriously concerned about how this impacts, right? Like if we think about GDP and the small shifts that change the way our entire economy comes together, and you think about businesses and the responsibility they have for their shareholders, or to be competitive, or all of the other reasons, it's just way more efficient to use AI than people. And I feel like there's a big concern that, just masses wise, people that do all shapes and sizes of jobs and responsibilities, from administrative to HR related to all of the things that our entire society from the Industrial Revolution till now has been propped up on, is based on people working with people and to an organization that fuels things. But if you look at it from a percentage perspective, if a company's like scrutinizing cost and they have to compete just to survive as a business, they probably pretty soon could get away with 30% less people, at least. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll quickly talk about the technology that I've seen. Like one of the big technologies that's out right now for like tech office users are like they're tracking steps when people are getting up from their desks, walking to get coffee, going into the offices, how often those offices are being used, when and how times of the day that these aspects of the office are being used. And they're generating like full-on data reports that show everything about the people that come in the office, how they move amongst the office. And they're like just invisible trackers that exist at pretty much every corner of the space. But in aggregate, probably the last 3 years, this technology has existed, and it's getting smarter and smarter in helping to predict like how you're actually utilizing the office and helping people make decisions about it. So that's a again, like another one of the things that I'm like, oh, that seems like a red flag to me, right? Like, how often are we really using it? How often is Peter getting up from his desk and getting coffee? Like, that technology exists if you didn't know it, but that's on the real estate side for tech. Anything else you guys seen?
I think, like you mentioned, hyperspectral basically tracking. So heat tracking, being able to identify like who's going what pathway and how many times, what the frequency is. I've seen a lot on the climate change side. So, there are a couple of companies that use the blockchain to assess, carbon capture. So, how much greenhouse gases have you been using? How many emissions are you generating? And how can that be mitigated over time through, more energy efficient or renewable energy technology and applications? If you're shifting from gas to electric stoves, for example. So that's going to be big. I'd say that that's probably going to be large for the next decade plus, because we're moving to a space where people are more climate conscious. But that's probably one of the major areas that I've seen.
So I can speak to a few things related to smaller commercial deals. I've got properties in my portfolio now, which are primarily in D.C., Michigan, and Ohio. And what I've done is I've taken the approach of having the property manager there deal with all the tactical issues day to day. But I built what I call my strategic asset management layer on top of that, which is all based around IoT devices for weather monitoring on premises. So there's actually like a little weather vane thing that measures rain and wind on the rooftop. It detects lightning. That gives me local weather at that location, rainfall amounts, and then also have water monitoring. So I can basically whip up my phone and I can see at any point in time water flow throughout all the units in the building. I can see electricity consumption from the main panel as well for all the common areas. I can actually remotely monitor, of course, via cameras, of course, what's on site. And I also recently installed, they have basically Ethernet-based LED lights. So they're lights like this. They're basically panels, but they're powered over Ethernet and they're run into a switch. So they actually are network devices, but they're these 2x2 foot panels. So I can remotely turn those devices off and on, set them on timers. I started doing all these things because what I was running into was I could ask the PMs to do something, but I needed a way to verify they were doing that. And then I also needed a way to be able to audit what was happening. So this gives me multiple layers of not only historical data in terms of temperature, humidity inside of buildings, water usage. It gives me the ability to also be able to forecast and project forward. One concern I had for the properties in Ohio is that in the basements, although the subterranean temperature is about 55 degrees, average around the year, there's a lot of humidity. And I wanted to make sure that during the wintertime that I could know what the temperature bounds were, because I needed to know whether I needed to attempt to add a heat source to the basements because they're unheated, because I didn't want to have frozen water pipes. So now I have monitors there which give me literally a minute-by-minute graph of temperature. I can go back over the last year and see the fluctuations. So it just gives me a degree of security about the asset. And then, rolling up to insurance, these are all things which help with insurance because I have documented evidence of past performance, and I also have the ability to project forward to how certain incidents may affect that in the future. If it's -5 degrees, I know that threshold within a day or two is not bad enough for me to be concerned. If it went on for like 2 weeks, then it's likely that the ground temperature would drop enough that I would have to take some measures to make sure that nothing in the basement freezes. But applying a lot of the just data technologies I find is really useful. The next layer above that is then getting into AI and machine learning, where you begin to roll that data into another tool and then analyze it. But that's just on the side of managing assets, protecting them, and also strategically designing a portfolio system that allows me to be able to make sure that I know what's happening with an asset, and maybe even alert the PMs before things happen, or be able to respond immediately and know the severity of something that might be reported from a tenant that the PM doesn't have insight into because they can't see the systems.
So maybe I can round this back out to some of the silver linings of where we see the entertainment and studio space world going. Chris, maybe just top 3 optimism signs that you see right now that make you excited to get up and go at it every day.
That it's almost over. Well, look, I mean, there's not a ton of signs that like we're gonna have an easy time through 25, but I think the reality of it is look, production has ebbed and flowed in LA for years. In the early 2000s, we lost most of our major films as things bounce back. I mean, what gives me confidence is the historical data that says LA still remains a place that people want to produce content. And despite the losses over time, we do always seem to adjust and bounce back. So I have to assume that historicals are going to, play out true again. In what way? Who knows? But I'm trusting in the process of it. But the reality of it is I'm confident in the real estate we own. I'm confident at the basis we bought it at. And I'm confident that we know how to leverage both of those things to make money in the future. And smart real estate owners who own their real estate will figure it out. And so that's what I'm confident in.
An outlook about the film studio market?
Well, no. I'm going to switch up the question for you. So let's do it like this. What are some of the things that you see emerging around LA? Because you're not a native LA guy. He's from New York, in case you guys didn't know. The Bronx, right?
Parents from the Bronx. I'm from Jersey.
From Jersey. Okay, Jersey. So I actually like to describe LA and boroughs kind of the same way because we have the most interesting clustering effect of the city. You could live in Los Feliz and never know somebody from Santa Monica for 50 years and be totally fine.
Absolutely.
LA is uniquely qualified to isolate people into like these micro worlds where if you don't know somebody, you'll never know. Yeah. And I think that's kind of cool, but it also is kind of limiting to be able to like cross barriers and see the entire city. How do you see like community development and growth and investment in these micro pockets around the city forming over the next couple of years with interest rates where they are, with businesses feeling a little bit more challenged? Like, do you see development happening? If so, where? Do you see lending happening for emerging businesses that are coming out of LA? Any signs of optimism for the future from not only a business perspective, but from a banking investment perspective?
Massive optimism. I know that we're kind of over time, so I'm not going to speak too much on this, but I would say the Community Reinvestment Act did a number around providing low-cost capital opportunities to a lot of areas in LA. Inglewood, Boyle Heights, South LA, Leimert Park, just to name a few. And so a lot of co-located development projects are going to happen there. Like we were talking about Intuit earlier, the Intuit Dome that's in Inglewood and SoFi Stadium. A lot of business development is happening in that region. The Pacoima district as well. So if you are developing affordable housing there as an anchor point, thinking about other institutions that are already there, non-for-profit institutions, schools, the health system, that's kind of how I would think about the market. Like, how strong are the anchors? How connected are the businesses? How co-located are the small to medium enterprises? And if there's a good level of connectivity there, particularly on the institutional side, there may be good opportunities not only to raise capital, but to, move, frankly, because those are going to be locations that are well capitalized in the future. One more thing that I'd probably say on this, when you think about institutions, and I come from an institutional lending background, there's so much around supply chain management and diversifying supply chains that needs to be talked about more. A lot of these, like if you think about higher education, so USC, just the cafeteria, you have a number of vendors that provide goods and services and food to the cafeteria. Imagine if there are more co-located businesses around South LA that are working with USC. I'm sure there are many already. But that's something that can be amplified even more so, especially with diverse business owners. So, there's a ton of opportunity. I think that there's a good sign of optimism, even as the film studio industry is changing. the Community Reinvestment Act has done a lot to allow and promote reinvestment into these areas, providing low-cost capital and grants. So, yeah, happy to talk about that more after.
Great. And then, Michael, I'm going to switch up the question for you, and we'll close off with this. In terms of how you see the future businesses that are being built here in Los Angeles, what do you see as like the next big thing that's around the corner that we're not maybe thinking about now, or whether it's in the entertainment space, tech space, or any other space? Like what can we be proud of? If it's not entertainment today, what will it be in the future?
If I think about the companies, the startups I'm talking to, and what I see, overall, what I'm seeing is that there is a wave of entrepreneurship which has been focused on what I would call it attempting to put some rungs back in the ladder, the economic ladder that people can progress through, and I see it in the fractional real estate firms that are using the blockchain to allow you to buy in shares of property. I've got assets I've listed through those. I've seen it recently with some startups. I was talking to one which is attempting to create an alternative set of channels for renters to be able to locate property, and they're looking to bring realtors into that. And I thought, well, that's an interesting solution there because it puts another cash flow stream in the realtor's pocket and then also provides a vehicle that provides some additional vetting. I've heard from folks who are working in the cloud kitchen space, which is essentially shared commercial kitchens where you have a facility and you have kitchen assignments for individual businesses. So if your grandmother makes pupusas at home or cornbread or something and maybe sells them, at the swap meet, well, she can graduate into this program and then actually use this professional kitchen to create and store her goods and then scale out from that into perhaps having a real retail location or maybe sell to Whole Foods. So I see that there are more people attempting to focus on finding these firewalls of capital and social access and poke holes in them or build ladders over them so that more people have access to be able to not just survive, but to be able to skill up, participate in the economy, and not have it be something where you always have this kind of, worker versus capital, tenant versus landlord relationship.
Thank you guys for your time.